hit the Willow Grove School today, didn't we, Larry?
We did. We had a good day, good dive.
I tell you, that has been something that I've been waiting all summer to do. I didn't want to do that one by myself.
You know, it's a good dive. It's only been 40 years since I've been there, but
Yeah. A lot of people have asked about the Willow Grove School. Was I going to dive that and then show some footage? And yes, in this video here today, I'm going to show some footage of the Willow Grove School and get to the steps where Eddie Irons was the guy's name.
That's it.
Eddie Irons was buried. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hey guys, click that little subscribe button right there.
As we look at the ruins that remain of the old Willow Grove School, we're going to start in the basement and then come up around the flue, which is in the back of the building, and then around to the west side steps. As we do that, we're going to play some excerpts from Darren Shell's interview that we had last year on Relics Radio, talking about the history of Dale Hollow.
We want to know a little history about this lake. Can you tell us some things about Dale Hollow?
I'd be happy to. I grew up on the lake, and being a man-made reservoir, Dale Hollow, that sounds pretty simple. You know, you pour a few million acres of concrete and make a dam, but this happened back in the late 30s and early 40s, and they had to uproot many families, many farms, cemeteries. All these things had to be moved, and it was something that took several years to happen, and in the process there were many stories that went along with that about those that just plain didn't want to leave. You know, they were given a pretty good market value for their property, but if you don't want to leave your home, you don't want to leave. So there was a lot of touching stories that happened in that time frame, but they did. The lake was bulldozed, dynamited. Everything was pretty much eradicated, and then they built the dam. Well, Willow Grove was the biggest of the bunch. There were several other little smaller mini communities for sure, but Willow Grove was the city that was the biggest, and it probably had 300, maybe 400 people total if you consider the outskirts, and it was right along this winding creek called Irons Creek, Irons, I-R-O-N-S, Irons Creek, and it was right along there that this community, grew and became, and it had the biggest, facilities. It had general stores and schools and numerous businesses and many houses. So it's a beautiful valley town, and that's where they eventually just had to move from, and it had a lot of people there that were they thought they were not going to move. Willow Grove stretches back into the middle 1800s, but the ending of it was right when they made the lake in 1941, 42 ballpark. The earliest, long before the lake was made, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, mostly it was just Cherokee Indians that were here, but there were a few families that had come from the New England states, but one of them was the Irons family, and they had purchased their property, probably 500, 600, 700 acres of land from the Cherokee Indians. The fascinating thing about the Cherokee that were here is that the last great chief that was here, his name was Chief Nettle Carrier, and he, as far as I'm concerned, he's a brilliant man, because he never allowed his group to endure the Trail of Tears. They didn't wait to be forced out. And what I think is most brilliant about what he did is, not only did he sell the Irons family their property, but he also decided that, well, let's sell all this property rather than just dumping it and be forced out. Let's go ahead and sell it, and we'll move out, and then when we get where we're going, we'll be rich and prosperous. And that's exactly what they did. So even though they were forced out, much like the people of Willow Grove were, I mean, the Cherokee Indians were forced out in the early 1800s, but Nettle Carrier was smart enough. He was smart enough to see the beginning of the end. And he said, let's sell all this, and he did. And there was a bunch of Cherokee red tape and governmental red tape, but that's where the Irons came in, and they are the most prolific family in the Dale Hollow history. Our time frame is late 1700s, early 1800s, right about 1800, turn of the century. And in our part of the country, there was just there are very few people here other than Cherokee Indians and a few settlers. And but this settler family that bought their property from the Cherokee, the Irons, Edward Irons, he has the two children. He had a boy and a girl, and they were probably the most prolific in history of anything that happened in our neck of the woods at that time frame. And I'll tell you why. His daughter, Rachel Irons, she grew up and married a man by the name of William Dale, and they had 449 acres called the Dale Hollow for William Dale. They called it the Dale Hollow, and that is where our dam sits now, and that's why they called this lake Dale Hollow. So Rachel married William Dale and started a whole line of the Dale family, and that's where the name came from for the lake, and that's a big part of our history.
As we continue, we will pick up where we left off on the west side steps, and we'll make our way around to the front of the building, to the front porch, and we'll let Darren Shell tell us the amazing story of the saga of Eddie Irons, who is buried in the front porch of the old Willow Grove School. And then we'll make our way back around to the back of the building. If you want to hear the complete interview with Darren Shell, I'll leave the link in the description below. It's an hour-and-a-half interview. Very, very interesting.
The story of Eddie Irons is the most intriguing story that I've ever read, Darren. And I know that our listeners want to hear it. And Eddie Irons, the whole story of Eddie Irons kind of tells the story of Willow Grove and Dale Hollow Lake and everything. Share that with them.
He was a fiery young man. I mean, he was, for his 18th birthday, what he received from his family on his birthday was a racehorse. And it was both the horse and the rider were equally stubborn. Young Eddie was going to ride his horse on his birthday, and the horse wasn't real hit with that. So, he jumped on that horse, and while his whole family is right there watching him on his birthday get on his horse, and the horse wouldn't move, and finally it bolted and ran. And at age 18 on his birthday, that horse ran through a large walnut thicket, and Eddie's head hit a low-lying limb, and it killed him. So it was then that family, they took up the three hardest things in their lives. One One had to do with that 50 caliber musket and that horse. And the second found the father at the base of that walnut tree with his axe, and he hacked and cut away at that walnut tree that so innocently took his son's life. And for 2 days he cut and sawed and planed beautiful walnut boards. And for the third and hardest thing in his life, he slid his son into that casket and pegged it shut. So he was buried right out near Willow Grove Resort. This young man, long before the lake was here, was buried on a little knoll. And we thought that would be the end of it. The Irons family moved away. But the mystery of Eddie Irons stuck around. As time evolved, the community started to, come around, and what would someday become Willow Grove just happened to be where Eddie was buried. And as the city started to grow, they saw the need to build a school. And in so doing, they scraped off this shaly knoll overlooking Irons Creek. And lo and behold, they found a walnut casket. And that just happened to be Eddie Irons. They said, wow, some of them said, I think that's that Irons boy. Yeah, so anyway, they said, well, what are we going to do now? I mean, he's one of the settlers of old. What are we going to do? We've dug him up. We got to put a school here. And they said, well, let's just dig him a little deeper. And we'll put him right back where he got, and he'll be here as a testimony to the settlers of old. Okay, and that's what they did. And they built their school on top of him. Then about 50 years pass, and then Willow Grove has evolved, and so too did the school need to increase inside, and in so doing, they took down that building and started scraping off the soil to build a bigger school, and lo and behold, they found this walnut casket. And by now, some of the locals are saying, yep, that's that Irons boy, that red-headed Indian dude. Yeah. And they dug that poor guy up again.
Man.
And they said, now what are we going to do? We're building a school here. What are we going to do? And I said, well, tell you what, instead of just digging him in deeper, let's pour him into the concrete steps of the front porch. We'll slide that casket and all right in there, and we'll put him in there, and he'll be there forever as a testimony to the settlers of old, which is a great idea, and that's what they did. They poured him in the concrete steps, and time marched on for a few more years, and lo and behold, this lake thing we've been talking about all along came along, and the Corps of Engineers what they were doing were tearing down buildings and moving graves, and poor Eddie Irons just happened to be both. He just happened to be both. But so the poor lad, oh gosh, he's poured in concrete, and they decided they would dynamite him out of there. And the Corps of Engineers, they have him documented on the registry of moved graves, but they set off the dynamite, boom, nothing happened. Boom, some of the corners came off. The third time, boom. That rock would not come apart. So those that like to scuba dive can go down, and you can see the left-hand side of the steps that are all square and pretty. You can go down there about 15, 20 feet deep, and there's steps, and everything's beautiful, and then you get to the right-hand side, and there's this dynamited chunk of concrete. And it's in one piece. It's still in one piece. It looks a little rough. It looks a little rough from this dynamiting, but yeah, poor Eddie was both building and graveyard at the same time. Yeah, I can only imagine what it must have been like to give your son a gift of a horse, and then the horse take his life that day. I mean, that's just excruciatingly painful, but they had no idea they were going to keep digging him up. like he was bulbs in the garden. But we've had 1,000 great ghost stories about that, just things that have happened in the area. So, I mean, there's a lot of neat stuff that goes around that.
Do you say that is probably one of the, is that the most popular dive spot on the lake, the old school there at Willow Grove?
It probably is, just because of its size. It's in kind of a shallow part of the lake, and therefore it's not quite, the water clarity isn't quite as good there as it is the rest of the lake. But it's such a big foundation, and you can see you can literally swim into the basement and swim through doorways and steps, and I mean, it's all there. I mean, all the pile of bricks, and it's a creepy but really neat thing to look at. It's kind of like a shipwreck underwater. It's a schoolhouse underwater.
Hey, Darren, you've been a good guest. Tell everybody about your book. I've put the link in. I've put the Amazon link in on your book 3 or 4 times here tonight.
Thank you.
But tell them where they can find you, your websites, or what have you.
Basically, Amazon or most of your usual channels. You could even call the boat dock at Willow Grove if you wanted. But basically, Amazon's got them. I think that's might be the more expensive route, but yes, I have a website at author Darren Shell. But nonetheless, the history of Dow Hollow Lake is my primary book that most everybody seems to like the most. And I've got a lot of fiction too out there. But basically, there's several books. Even there's one called The Big Ones that is about the top 10 smallmouth. World record smallmouth in the world, and they're all on Dale Hollow, so that one's on there as well too. So I appreciate you having me on here, guys. I am flattered and enjoyed myself this evening.
Well, we enjoyed having you on here.